Hi, my name is Julia Griner and I'm a flutist and educator. This free instructional video series will discuss ways to approach specific etudes from Ernesto Köhler's 25 Romantic Etudes, Opus 66. We'll work through the challenges that each of these etudes pose, and I also will include free performance videos of each of the etudes we discuss. Today I will be talking about who Ernesto Köhler was and the purpose for etudes in flute instruction. Ernesto Köhler was born on December 4th, 1849 in Italy. He began playing flute at a young age, studying under his father, who was also a professional flutist. As children, Ernesto Köhler and his brother, who was a pianist, began touring Italy. They toured Italy several times and received high praise on their performances. Köhler's first position as a professor of flute was at the Viennese Carl Theater, which he left after a few years to perform in the Imperial Russian Opera in St. Petersburg. Most of Köhler's performance appointments were with ensembles, but he was well respected because of his achievements as a composer. During his time in Russia, Ernesto Köhler wrote over 100 compositions, several of which have become staples in the pedagogical flute repertoire. His pedagogical works focus on various technical and musical aspects. Each etude poses a different challenge, all of which appear in our flute literature. Many of Ernesto Köhler's etudes are used as audition material for high school honor bands, particularly studies from the Opus 66 collection. Etudes are excellent tools for discovering how to learn a piece quickly. They often present technical challenges that require us to think and practice creatively. Though sometimes etudes may feel like a typing exercise, they are often blank canvases that allow us to musically craft and shape the study in our own way. Let's begin by discussing how we can approach an etude in general before we get into all of the specific challenges that will be posed in the next several videos of this series. So pull up Opus 66, number 25, which is called the Russian Dance. So the first thing that I like to do is take a scan of it. Go ahead and look down the page, see what time signature we're in, key signature, what are the tempo markings, and translate any words that we're not familiar with. So at the beginning, we're in 2/4 at Allegro Vivo, but then about halfway down the page, it turns into Adantino, so a much slower section. We also go from E major into A minor in this Adantino section. And then there's a fermata, and it back to the Vivo, which returns to the A section, so E major and in 2/4. This is important information to know before we even pick up our flutes, so that we can have some sort of mental picture of what this sounds like. Now I would go ahead and sight read this piece, top to bottom, play it as slow as you possibly need to, but also try to keep in mind while you're playing mental notes of the spots that are challenging for you. We'll come back to that in a moment. Go ahead and pause this video and do your sight reading. So now that we've gone through and had our mental list of all of the things, go ahead and mark those. So the way that I like to do it is with brackets. Put brackets around specific measures or sections that are challenging. One section that was particularly challenging for my fingers when I was first learning this was at measure 16. This section goes. That's difficult because of the chromatics and also because some of the finger changes just feel a little funky on our fingers. So the first thing that I would do is get a metronome, and we're going to go ahead and play this super slowly. So this is at quarter note equals 66. Now I would go ahead and play that several more times at that speed. After playing through it more times, we click the tempo up to 70. Be sure to remember when you're doing these slow practices that this is a tone exercise. So yes, we're thinking about our fingers. Can we get them all to lock in exactly where we need them to? But also be sure that your air is still going and we're playing through to the end of the phrase, particularly on these 16th note passages. It's very common for our brains to get so focused on our fingers and making sure that we're getting all of the right notes that it's easy to forget that our airstream needs to be very consistent and just turned on. So starting at a slow tempo is helpful because it allows us to break things down and not have to think about as many things at once. So I'll play it at 66 5 to 7 times. Click the metronome up to 70, play it another 7 times, and then keep incrementally speeding it up. Sometimes you might get stuck at a point and think this is, the threshold, your breaking point. So go ahead and spend a few extra days just playing those sections at this tempo. Eventually, you'll be able to speed it up gradually, and the more time that you spend playing it slow, the easier it will be when you play it faster, I promise. Now, once we use that tactic on all of the spots that are tricky for our fingers, we can go ahead and do another playthrough. I would choose a tempo that you can get all of those tricky bracket spots consistently at. So pick the one that's the hardest for you on that given day and set your metronome and then play the entire piece top to bottom, or in this case, the vivo sections at that tempo to make sure things are consistent. Once you've done that, it's time to start thinking about musical choices. Of course, this should be something that we're thinking about all the time when we play, but sometimes it's nice to take a break and just start by focusing on our fingers and the rhythms. One helpful thing can be listening to recordings. There are several recordings of these pieces out there, so go ahead and look up on YouTube or on Google, and it'll be pretty easy to find it if you use the Opus number. Now, I do want to emphasize that just because other flutists have made specific musical choices does not mean that you have to make these choices too. It's important that we make informed decisions, but they don't have to sound like a carbon copy of other flutists that we hear. Within these musical choices is phrasing. I like to go ahead and mark all of my breaths. So for example, I have a breath marked at between those 30-second notes right before measure 35. This reminds me that we're leading into the phrase even though it's not starting on the measure. This reminds me that those 30-second notes are leading into the next phrase even though they don't start on the downbeat. This is also the time to start making decisions about vibrato, other places to breathe, phrasing, dynamics. And you might be thinking, like I was when I first started learning the flute, that our job is to just follow exactly what is written on the page. And sometimes that can be true, but I think it's important, especially in pieces like these, to put your own stamp on it. There are some dynamics written. If we're looking, we do have some pianos and some fortes, and there are some crescendi, but largely there's a lot of room for shaping within those sections. So go ahead and play through it. The way that I like to approach this is picking a phrase and just playing that phrase over and over again, trying out different tactics and seeing what dynamics fit best. When we're approaching etudes, remember that starting slow is key. Slow practice and repetitive practice is the easiest and fastest way to learn this, even though it might seem counterproductive. Building that strong foundation is incredibly important for being able to play it at the tempo and with all of the characteristics that you want to play it with. Thank you so much for joining me, and I hope you enjoyed learning about how to approach etudes.